The Galactic Council chamber was massive, built from materials that seemed to shift between solid and liquid states depending on the angle of observation. Captain Jake Morrison stood at the human delegation podium, his dress uniform crisp and his expression calm. Beside him stood Commander Lisa Hayes, her tablet displaying the carefully prepared speech they had rehearsed for weeks. Behind them, 3 more human diplomats waited in perfect formation, their faces showing nothing but professional courtesy. Jake had been doing this for 15 years now. 15 years of smiling, bowing slightly when appropriate, and accepting whatever scraps of respect the galactic community chose to offer. Earth had joined this collection of alien civilizations with hope burning in every human heart. They had dreamed of partnership, of learning from species that had traveled the stars for thousands of years, of contributing to something greater than themselves. What they got instead was condescension. The Kryn representative, High Arbiter Zelthoon, barely glanced at Jake as he spoke. His armored crest, which supposedly indicated attention and respect among his people, remained flat against his skull. It was the Kryn equivalent of checking a phone during a conversation. Jake had learned to read these signs over the years, each small dismissal adding to a growing weight in his chest. The Orthodyne Collective representative, a being of crystalline energy named Murix, pulsed with colors that translated to boredom. The Velsh ambassador clicked its mandibles in a rhythm that their translators rendered as impatient huffing. Across the circular chamber, representatives from 40 different species showed various levels of disinterest in what the human delegation had to say. Jake pressed on anyway, because that was his job. He explained Earth's proposal for joint research into sustainable farming techniques that could benefit developing worlds. He showed projections of increased food production, detailed methodologies, and offered to share everything freely. It was good work, the kind of contribution that could save millions of lives on worlds struggling with agricultural challenges. The Council voted to table the proposal indefinitely. No discussion, no debate, just a casual dismissal. Zelthoon didn't even offer an explanation, simply moved to the next item on the agenda. Lisa's hand tightened around her tablet, but her face remained neutral. She had learned the same lessons Jake had. Show nothing, accept everything, maintain courtesy no matter what. That was how species survived in the galactic community when they held no power. After the session ended, Jake and Lisa walked through the crystalline corridors of Central Hub Station. Other species moved around them, some acknowledging their presence with minimal gestures, most simply ignoring them. A group of young Velsh warriors deliberately blocked their path, forcing the humans to step aside. It was a small dominance display, the kind that happened constantly. Jake stepped aside without complaint. Back in their quarters, Lisa finally let her frustration show. She threw the tablet onto a chair and ran her hands through her hair. Her voice came out tight with controlled anger that had been building for months. 15 years, she said. 15 years of this treatment. When does it end? Jake loosened his collar and sat down heavily. He looked older than his 50 years, the weight of diplomatic failure aging him in ways that showed around his eyes and in the set of his shoulders. It doesn't end, he replied quietly. Not unless we change something fundamental. But we can't, so we endure. What neither of them said aloud was the truth they both knew. Earth had a military, of course. Every species did. But Earth's fleet consisted of patrol ships designed for asteroid mining and colony supply runs. They had some weapons, enough to handle pirates or small disputes, but nothing that could stand against a real galactic power. The Kryn Empire alone had more warships than humanity had colony worlds. So they smiled and accepted their place. The message arrived 3 days later, transmitted through standard galactic channels. It came from New Haven, one of Earth's agricultural colonies in the Arcturus sector. The settlement had been established 12 years ago, a joint venture with the Council's blessing. 40,000 humans lived there now, farming the rich soil and sending food back to Earth and other colony worlds. Jake read the message twice, his face going pale. Lisa stood beside him, reading over his shoulder, her hand coming up to cover her mouth. The Velsh swarm had declared New Haven to be territory suitable for their expansion. They cited some obscure galactic statute about unclaimed agricultural worlds and the rights of superior species to requisition resources. The legal language was complex, but the meaning was brutally simple. The Velsh wanted New Haven and they were taking it, The message included a timeline. Humans had one standard galactic cycle, roughly 30 Earth days, to evacuate the colony completely. After that, any remaining humans would be classified as labor assets and absorbed into the Welsh worker castes. It was slavery dressed up in legal terminology. Jake immediately requested an emergency council session. He used every diplomatic channel available, calling in every small favor humanity had managed to accumulate over 15 years. The council agreed to meet, but not for 3 weeks. Apparently, there were more pressing matters to discuss first. Those 3 weeks felt like drowning in slow motion. Jake presented humanity's case to anyone who would listen. He met with individual species representatives, explaining that this wasn't just about New Haven. It was about whether the council stood for anything beyond raw power. If the Welsh could simply take a peaceful colony without consequences, what message did that send? Most species listened politely and promised to consider the matter. A few expressed sympathy. None offered actual help. Lisa spent those weeks coordinating with New Haven's governor, a woman named Patricia Cole, who kept her people calm even as Welsh warships began arriving in orbit. Patricia sent daily reports describing the growing blockade, the occasional threatening flybys, the psychological pressure of watching alien ships circle overhead like predators. The children on New Haven could see the Welsh vessels with their naked eyes now. They asked their parents why the bad aliens were allowed to scare them. The parents had no good answers. Finally, the council convened. Jake stood once again at the human podium, but this time his carefully prepared speech carried an edge of desperation that he couldn't quite hide. He laid out the facts clearly. The Welsh claim was based on a statute that nobody had enforced in centuries. New Haven had been properly registered and recognized. 40,000 human lives hung in the balance. He asked for council intervention, not military action, just diplomatic pressure. A simple statement that the Welsh claim was invalid and that established colonies had rights under galactic law. The council debated for 6 hours. Species Jake had worked with for years suddenly discovered technicalities and precedents that complicated the matter. The discussion went in circles, with each species calculating how any decision might affect their own interests. When the vote finally came, it wasn't even close. The council voted to abstain from involvement. This was classified as a territorial dispute between a Tier 3 species and a Tier 5 species, and council policy was non-interference in such matters. Humanity would have to negotiate directly with the Welsh High Arbiter. Zeltun delivered the verdict with the same bored expression he showed during normal sessions. To him, this was just another administrative matter. The fact that 40,000 lives depended on it apparently didn't register as particularly important. Jake felt something crack inside his chest. He had believed, despite everything, that when it truly mattered, the council would show some basic decency. He had been wrong. The galaxy didn't care about justice or fairness or the lives of people it considered beneath notice. It cared only about power. He looked at Lisa and saw his own realization reflected in her eyes. They had played by the rules, followed every protocol, maintained perfect courtesy, and it had gained them nothing. Jake took a slow breath and made a decision that would change everything. When he spoke, his voice was different. The diplomatic softness was gone, replaced by something colder and infinitely more dangerous. "Then we withdraw our petition for council intervention," he said. "Earth will handle this matter through our own resources." Zeltun nodded absently, already moving to the next agenda item. He didn't notice the change in Jake's tone. Neither did most of the council representatives. But a few did, species whose own histories included moments of transformation. They felt something primal stir in response to that cold voice, some ancient recognition of what happens when courtesy dies. Jake left the council chamber and walked directly to the secure communication room. He entered his command codes and opened the most classified channel available to Earth's diplomatic corps. The encryption was military grade, routed through quantum entanglement relays that made interception impossible. The face that appeared on the screen belonged to Admiral Richard Cole, commander of Earth's Defense Forces and Patricia's husband. The Admiral was positioned somewhere classified, somewhere the galactic community knew nothing about. Jake spoke clearly, his voice carrying 15 years of suppressed anger. "Authorization code Crimson. The Council has abandoned us. All diplomatic protocols are hereby suspended. Richard's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Anticipation, maybe, or relief that the waiting was finally over. Confirmed, Captain Morrison. Authorization code Crimson received and verified. All ships are moving to combat status. We will protect our people. The transmission ended. Jake sat alone in the communication room for several minutes, staring at the blank screen. Somewhere far away, in places the galaxy didn't know existed, humanity was dropping a mask it had worn for 15 years. The Velsh swarm thought they understood humans. They had seen Earth's patrol ships and dismissed them as primitive. They had observed human colonies and classified them as weak. They had studied human diplomatic behavior and concluded that humanity would accept subjugation rather than fight. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Because humanity hadn't been weak for 15 years. They had been polite. And there was a universe of difference between those two things. Lisa found Jake an hour later. She didn't ask what he had done. She already knew. Instead, she sat beside him and spoke quietly. How long until they arrive? 4 days, Jake replied. Richard had ships pre-positioned. Just in case, will it be enough? Jake smiled, and for the first time in 15 years, it wasn't a diplomatic smile. It was something fierce and cold and absolutely certain. It'll be enough. Because we're not going to fight the way they expect. We're not going to follow their rules or their conventions or their idea of civilized warfare. We're going to show them what true war looks like. Lisa nodded slowly. The decision was made. There was no going back now. Humanity had tried courtesy, tried diplomacy, tried fitting into the galactic community's expectations. The galaxy had responded by threatening to enslave 40,000 people. Now the galaxy would learn what happened when humanity stopped being. Courteous Admiral Richard Cole stood on the bridge of the EDF Valiant, watching the tactical display with calm eyes that betrayed none of the satisfaction building in his chest. For 10 years he had waited in the darkness beyond Neptune's orbit, commanding a fleet that officially did not exist. The ships around him had been built in secret facilities scattered throughout the solar system, hidden from galactic sensors by technology that humanity had developed specifically for this purpose. The authorization code from Jake Morrison had arrived 4 days ago. Richard had immediately given the order his crews had been training for since the fleet's inception. Every ship powered up their main drives, dropped their stealth systems, and began the jump sequence to Arcturus sector. 340 warships appeared on galactic monitoring stations simultaneously. The sudden emergence of such a massive fleet sent shockwaves through every military headquarters in known space. Species that had dismissed humanity as technologically primitive suddenly faced the reality that Earth had been hiding something enormous. Commander Helen Grant piloted her fighter from the carrier, EDF Typhoon, her hands steady on the controls despite the adrenaline flooding her system. She had been flying simulations of this exact scenario for 6 years. Her brother lived on New Haven with his wife and 2 children. Helen had volunteered for the fighter corps the day she learned about the Velsh threat, driven by a cold fury that had only intensified during the journey to Arcturus. The Velsh commander, a warrior named Scratix, received the alert about the approaching human fleet with amusement, rather than concern. His 80 warships surrounded New Haven in a standard blockade formation, positioned to intimidate rather than fight. The Velsh had encountered human patrol ships before during border incidents. Those vessels had been small, lightly armed, and easily outmaneuvered. Scratix assumed these new ships would be similar, just more numerous. He was about to learn the difference between patrol craft and warships designed for total destruction. The 2 human fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel in a formation that Velsh computers couldn't categorize. Instead of the organized line patterns that every galactic military used, the human ships scattered across a massive volume of space in what looked like complete chaos. Velsh tactical officers reported the formation as disorganized and vulnerable. They were wrong on both counts. Richard gave the order from his command chair, his voice carrying across the fleet through quantum-entangled communication systems that operated faster than light itself. All ships, weapons free, execute pattern Wolf. Show them what we brought. The scattered human ships suddenly moved in perfect synchronization, their seemingly random positions revealing themselves as carefully calculated firing solutions. Every human vessel had multiple targets locked, with overlapping fields of fire that left the Velsh formation with nowhere to maneuver. Helen led her fighter wing in what the tactical manual called Dispersal Pattern Alpha. Instead of flying in tight formation like galactic fighters did, each human pilot controlled their ship independently while coordinating through the quantum network. To Welsh sensors, it looked like 300 individual threats instead of one organized squadron. The Welsh expected energy weapons, the standard armament for every military in the galaxy. Particle beams, plasma cannons, directed energy projectors. Their shields were designed to handle such weapons. Built from technology refined over thousands of years of conventional warfare, humanity didn't use conventional weapons. The first salvo came from the railgun batteries. Solid slugs of tungsten carbide alloy accelerated to 15% of light speed by electromagnetic force. The physics were simple and brutal. At that velocity, the kinetic energy was so massive that it didn't matter what kind of shields the target had. The slugs punched through Welsh defensive screens like they weren't even there. Skradix's flagship, the Hive Queen, took the first hit. A 20-kilogram projectile moving at 45,000 kilometers per second struck the vessel's forward section. The impact released energy equivalent to a small nuclear weapon. The Hive Queen's shields flickered once and died. The slug continued through the hull, through 3 decks of crew compartments, and exited the far side in a spray of superheated metal and atmosphere. The second hit struck near the reactor core. The Hive Queen simply ceased to exist, replaced by an expanding sphere of plasma visible from 3 star systems away, but the railguns were just the opening. Human ships mounted weapon systems that had been banned by galactic convention for 4,000 years. Nuclear-pumped laser arrays, devices that used atomic explosions to generate coherent light beams of staggering intensity. The galaxy had outlawed them as excessively cruel, weapons that caused unnecessary suffering. Humanity had built 600 of them. The laser arrays fired, their beams cutting through Welsh dreadnoughts like surgical instruments. Ships that had taken decades to build were sliced into segments in seconds. The vacuum of space filled with debris and the frozen bodies of Welsh warriors who had believed themselves superior. Commander Danny Foster commanded the destroyer EDF Hammer, positioned at the edge of the human formation. His ship specialized in missile warfare, carrying payload bays filled with weapons the Welsh had never imagined facing. Danny watched his tactical display as the firing solutions updated in real time. "Launch full spread," he ordered. "Give them everything." The Hammer's missile tubes opened, releasing a swarm of warheads that accelerated toward the Welsh fleet. These weren't the guided rockets that galactic militaries used. These were kinetic kill vehicles with thermonuclear payloads, designed by a species that had spent 10,000 years perfecting the art of killing each other. The galaxy had banned atomic weapons in space warfare millennia ago. The radiation, the indiscriminate destruction, the long-term contamination, it was considered barbaric, a relic of primitive species that didn't understand civilized conflict. Humanity had built 12,000 nuclear warheads and loaded them onto their warships without hesitation. The first missile struck a Welsh cruiser amidships. The warhead detonated with a yield of 500 kilotons, creating a miniature sun that consumed the target vessel and damaged everything within 1,000 kilometers. The explosion was so bright that colonists on New Haven could see it with their naked eyes, a new star appearing in their sky. Helen dove her fighter through the expanding debris field, her targeting computer painting hostile icons across her display. Welsh interceptors tried to form up and counterattack, but they moved in predictable patterns based on 4,000 years of unchanged tactical doctrine. Helen and her squadron had studied those patterns until they could predict Welsh movements before the enemy pilots made them. She fired a burst from her rotary cannon, the depleted uranium rounds shredding a Welsh fighter's wings. The enemy craft tumbled away, venting atmosphere. Helen felt nothing but cold satisfaction. Her brother's children would not become slaves. The battle lasted 7 minutes from first shot to final kill. When it ended, all 80 Welsh warships had been destroyed or disabled beyond any hope of repair. Debris filled the space around New Haven, chunks of hull plating and frozen bodies creating a graveyard that would orbit the planet for decades. Human casualties numbered 0. 3 ships had taken minor damage from desperate Welsh return fire. 12 fighters reported scorch marks on their armor. Nobody had died. The annihilation of the Welsh blockade fleet. He felt no joy in the destruction, no triumph in the one-sided slaughter. But he felt a deep, bone-deep satisfaction that his people were safe. He opened a channel to New Haven. Patricia's face appeared on the screen, tears running down her cheeks as she looked up at the sky where the Welsh fleet had been. "You're safe now," Richard said simply. "Nobody will threaten you again." Patricia nodded, unable to speak. Behind her, Richard could see colonists gathering in the streets, looking up at the debris field with expressions of shock and relief. Richard switched to the galactic emergency frequency, the channel monitored by every military force in known space. When he spoke, his voice carried to thousands of worlds simultaneously. "This is Admiral Richard Cole of the Earth Defense Fleet. We are transmitting full tactical data from the engagement at Arcturus. All species are advised to review this material carefully. Humanity is no longer accepting our assigned tier classification. Any species that threatens human colonies or human citizens will receive the same response as the Welsh swarm." He paused, letting that sink in across the galaxy. "We have been polite for 15 years. That was your warning period. It has now expired," the transmission ended. Across known space, military analysts began downloading the battle data, their initial disbelief giving way to horrified fascination as they watched the recordings. The humans hadn't just won a battle. They had introduced weapons and tactics that made 4,000 years of military development obsolete overnight. The Kryn High Command convened an emergency session. Their top strategic minds reviewed the human attack patterns and reached a unanimous conclusion. If humanity attacked the Kryn Empire with these weapons and tactics, the war would be over in weeks, maybe days. The Orthodyne Collective recalled all their border fleets to defensive positions around their core worlds. Their energy-based weapons and shields were designed to counter similar technology. Against solid projectiles moving at relativistic speeds, they were nearly useless. Smaller species that had dismissed humanity as weak newcomers suddenly realized they had been sharing the galaxy with predators who had chosen to hide their fangs. The casual contempt they had shown for 15 years transformed into fear. Helen landed her fighter on the Typhoon's deck, her hands shaking slightly now that the adrenaline was fading. She had killed at least 6 Welsh pilots during the engagement, maybe more. The exact count didn't matter. What mattered was that her brother's family was safe. Danny Foster secured his weapon systems and began the post-battle assessment. The Hammer had expended 40% of its missile inventory. He made a note to requisition more warheads. Something told him this wouldn't be the last battle. Richard Cole remained on the bridge of the Valiant, watching the debris field and thinking about what came next. The galaxy now knew that humanity could fight. The real question was whether they would be smart enough to accept the new reality, or stupid enough to test human resolve again. He suspected it would be the latter. Power structures didn't change easily, and the galactic order had been stable for thousands of years. Someone would inevitably decide that humanity's victory was a fluke, that their weapons could be countered, that the old hierarchy could be maintained. Those species would learn the same lesson the Welsh had learned. Humanity didn't fight for glory or honor or territorial expansion. They fought to protect their people, and they fought with every weapon and tactic available. The galaxy called it barbaric, humanity called it survival. And in 7 minutes of brutal one-sided combat, humanity had proven which philosophy was more effective. The Galactic Council's emergency session began 16 hours after the Arcturus battle, and Jake Morrison entered the chamber wearing his military uniform instead of diplomatic robes. The change was deliberate and unmistakable. Lisa Hayes walked beside him, also in uniform, with Colonel Steve Palmer flanking them on the other side. All three wore sidearms on their hips, weapons that would have been unthinkable in the council chambers just days before. High Arbiter Zelthoon stood at his position, his crest fully extended in what Jake had learned was a Kryn threat display. The massive alien's voice boomed across the chamber with barely controlled fury. "You have violated 47 galactic conventions," Zelthoon began, his armored plates rattling. "Nuclear weapons in space, kinetic bombardment above certain velocities, unrestricted warfare protocols, attacks without formal declaration. These are the tools of barbarians, not civilized species." Jake didn't smile this time. His face remained cold and emotionless as he responded in a voice that carried clearly to every representative in the chamber. "You refused to protect our people. You told us to handle the situation ourselves. We did exactly that." Murex of the Orthodyne Collective pulsed with agitated colors, his crystalline form flickering between red and orange in patterns that translated to anger and confusion. "Your species agreed to abide by civilized standards when you joined this community," Murex said. "You accepted our laws and conventions." Lisa Hayes stepped forward, her voice sharp and precise like a surgical blade cutting through pretense. "We agreed to pursue peaceful resolution of conflicts," she said. "We spent 3 weeks asking for your help while the Velsh prepared to enslave 40,000 of our people. You chose to do nothing. You told us we were on our own. So we acted accordingly." Steve Palmer activated a holographic display that appeared in the center of the council chamber. Images materialized showing facilities and installations that had been hidden from galactic observation for over a decade. Shipyards in the asteroid belt building vessels that dwarfed anything the council had seen, weapons research stations on the moons of Jupiter and Saturn, manufacturing complexes on Mars producing armaments at a scale that made several representatives gasp, audibly. "Let me show you what humanity has been building while we smiled and followed your rules," Steve said calmly. "While we accepted your condescension and played the role of grateful newcomers, we were preparing for the day when courtesy would no longer be enough." The display shifted to show fleet compositions and deployment statistics. Numbers appeared that made the chamber fall into stunned silence. "We have 2,400 warships," Steve continued. "The 340 we deployed to Arcturus represent 14% of our total combat capacity. We have 17,000 nuclear weapons in active deployment, with production facilities capable of manufacturing 500 more per month. Our industrial base can replace our entire battle fleet every 8 months. A Velsh representative, one of the few survivors of Skradix's command structure, clicked his mandibles in distress. The sound translated as horrified disbelief. Other species began calculating the numbers in their heads, comparing them to their own military forces. The mathematics were brutal and undeniable. Humanity could fight the entire Galactic Council to a standstill, possibly even win. Jake Morrison walked to the center of the chamber. Standing beneath the holographic displays showing humanity's true military might, he turned slowly, making eye contact with representatives from every major power. "We didn't come to this galaxy looking for war," he said. "We came with hope. We wanted to learn from you, to contribute to something greater than ourselves. We believed in the ideals your council claimed to represent: justice, cooperation, mutual protection." His voice hardened, each word dropping like stones into still water. "You responded by treating us like children. You assigned us a low tier based on the ships we showed you, never suspecting we might have hidden our true strength. You dismissed our proposals, ignored our contributions, and when we desperately needed your help, you abandoned us." Zeltoon's crest flattened slightly, a sign that Jake had learned meant discomfort or uncertainty in Kryn body language. "You speak of violations," the High Arbiter said, but his voice had lost some of its earlier fury. "Your weapons, your tactics, they violate every standard of civilized warfare." Jake's expression remained ice-cold as he responded. "Your civilized warfare is a luxury afforded to species with power. You created rules that protect your interests while leaving weaker species vulnerable. When we needed those rules to protect us, you chose not to enforce them, so we made our own rules." Lisa activated another section of the holographic display. Battle simulations filled the space above them, showing human fleets engaging various council species. The projections were detailed and devastating, based on 15 years of careful study and analysis. "We didn't just build weapons," Lisa explained. "We studied every species in this council. We analyzed your tactics, your technologies, your military doctrines. We know your weaknesses better than you know them yourselves." The simulations played out with brutal efficiency. Human ships using unconventional attack patterns to overwhelm Kryn formations, nuclear strikes bypassing orthodyne energy shields, kinetic weapons shredding through defenses designed only to stop energy-based attacks. Each simulation ended the same way, with human victory achieved through methods the galaxy had never encountered. Steve Palmer's voice cut through the shocked silence that followed. In our conflicts, they had never faced an enemy that treats warfare as a science to be perfected. Humanity has been fighting itself for 10,000 years. We have refined killing into an art form. We just chose not to demonstrate that fact until we had no other choice. A small species representative, a being from the Helios Compact that had always been kind to humans, spoke up with a trembling voice. What do you want from us? Jake turned to face the speaker and his expression softened just slightly. What we've always wanted, he said. Equal treatment. Fair arbitration when conflicts arise. Mutual respect between species. But we're done asking politely. From this moment forward, humanity deals with the galaxy as an equal power, or we deal with you as enemies. The choice is yours. Murex pulsed with darker colors, his crystalline structure dimming as he processed the implications. You threaten the entire council? We inform you of the new reality, Jake corrected. We gave you 15 years to accept us as partners. You chose contempt instead. Now you'll accept us as equals, or you'll face the consequences of continued hostility. Lisa stepped beside Jake, presenting a unified front. Any attack on human territory will be met with total war, she said. We will not fight by your conventions. We will not accept arbitrary limitations. We will fight to win using every weapon and tactic at our disposal. The council chamber erupted in overlapping voices. Some species demanded action against human aggression. Others called for immediate negotiations. A few simply sat in stunned silence, trying to process how dramatically the galactic balance of power had shifted in a single day. Zeltun raised one massive arm, calling for order. The chamber gradually quieted, though tension crackled in the air like static electricity. The council will need time to consider your position, the High Arbiter said carefully, his word choice notably diplomatic compared to his earlier accusations. Take all the time you need, Jake replied, but understand this clearly. We are declaring the Arcturus sector as human sovereign space. Any vessel that enters without explicit permission will be destroyed without warning. Consider that your courtesy notice. He paused at the chamber entrance, turning back to face the assembled representatives one final time. One more thing, he said. We're not the weak newcomers you thought you knew. We never were. We were simply waiting to see if this galaxy deserved the partnership we offered. You failed that test. Now we'll build the kind of galaxy we want to live in, with or without your cooperation. The human delegation left the council chamber in formation, their footsteps echoing in the silence that followed. Species that had casually dismissed humanity for years now watched them leave with expressions of fear and grudging respect. In the corridors outside, away from the council's eyes, Lisa finally allowed herself to show emotion. Her hands shook slightly as the adrenaline faded. We just threatened the entire galactic order, she said quietly. Jake nodded, his own tension evident in the tight set of his shoulders. We did, and they'll either accept it or try to crush us. Either way, we're committed now. Steve Palmer checked his communication device, reading updates from the fleet. Admiral Cole reports all human colonies are on high alert, he said. The fleet is dispersing to defensive positions. If the council decides to respond militarily, we'll be ready. Jake looked out through the transparent sections of the corridor, seeing the stars and the various ships docked at Central Hub Station. Somewhere out there, humanity's hidden fleet waited in the darkness, ready to defend their species with weapons the galaxy had never imagined facing. The age of human diplomacy had ended. What came next would depend on whether the galaxy could adapt to a new power that refused to follow the old rules. Either way, humanity would never again hide their strength or accept treatment as inferior. They had shown the galaxy what true war looked like. Now they would show them what true resolve looked like. And if the council chose conflict over cooperation, humanity would teach them the final lesson. That sometimes the most dangerous species are the ones that tried peace first, because those species know exactly why they're fighting, and they'll never stop until they win. The Kryn Empire made their move 3 weeks after Jake Morrison's declaration before the council. High Commander Vortax convinced himself that humanity's victory at Arcturus had been luck, that the Velsh had simply been unprepared for unconventional tactics. He assembled 200 warships and sent them to patrol the border of the Arcturus sector, claiming it was a routine military exercise permitted under galactic law. Admiral Richard Cole watched the Kryn fleet approach the exclusion zone from his command center on the Valiant. He had expected this. The galaxy's power structures couldn't simply accept a new order without testing it first. The Kryn were proud warriors with a military tradition stretching back thousands of years. They needed to learn the lesson personally. Richard opened a secure channel to Earth Command and received his authorization within 90 seconds. The response was brief and absolute. Enforce the exclusion zone with extreme prejudice. Captain Danny Foster commanded the EDF Hammer, positioned at the edge of human-controlled space along with 40 other warships. His crew had been at battle stations for 6 hours, waiting for the Kryn to make their decision. When the enemy fleet crossed into the declared human zone, Danny didn't hesitate or issue warnings. "All batteries fire at will," he said calmly. "Target their capital ships first." The Kryn possessed shield technology that had been refined over millennia. Their defensive screens could absorb energy weapon fire almost indefinitely, recharging faster than most opponents could damage them. It was one reason the Kryn had dominated galactic warfare for so long. Their shields made them nearly invincible against conventional attacks. Humanity had spent 15 years studying those shields and engineering a solution. The Hammer's torpedo tubes opened, launching weapons that the Kryn sensors initially classified as standard plasma warheads. The torpedoes accelerated toward their targets, and Kryn shield operators prepared to absorb the impacts with casual confidence. Then the torpedoes activated their primary systems. Each warhead contained emitters that cycled through 47 different frequency bands in rapid succession, shifting faster than any shield generator could adapt. The technology was based on principles humanity had discovered while trying to penetrate their own experimental defensive systems. The lead Kryn dreadnought, Pride of Zeltun, took 6 torpedoes to its forward section. Its shields flickered through a rainbow of colors as the generators tried desperately to match the shifting frequencies. For 3 seconds, the shields held. Then they collapsed completely, overloaded by the constant adaptation requirements. The 7th torpedo struck bare hull and detonated inside the reactor compartment. The explosion tore the massive warship apart from the inside, scattering debris across thousands of kilometers. 3 nearby Kryn vessels were damaged by the blast, their own shields weakening from the energy overflow. Danny marked them as secondary targets and launched another salvo. Commander Helen Grant led her fighter wing from the carrier EDF Typhoon, her squadron of 60 fighters launching into the battlespace with practiced precision. But Helen wasn't alone. Each of her fighters controlled 15 autonomous combat drones through quantum-linked command systems, creating an effective force of 960 independent units. The Kryn interceptor screen moved to engage, their pilots confident in their superior numbers and experience. They flew in traditional formations, maintaining cohesion and mutual support exactly as their tactical manual specified. Helen's squadron scattered like debris, each fighter taking a different vector, while their drones spread across an enormous volume of space. To the Kryn pilots, it looked like chaos and panic. It was actually the most sophisticated combat coordination ever deployed in warfare. The drones attacked from every direction simultaneously, while the actual fighters stayed at maximum weapons range. Kryn pilots found themselves surrounded by targets that moved with inhuman precision, their own fire control systems overwhelmed by the sheer number of threats. They tried to reform their formations, to establish mutual defensive coverage, but the human attack pattern was specifically designed to punish that kind of thinking. Helen watched her tactical display as Kryn fighters died faster than their command structure could respond. She felt the same cold satisfaction she had experienced at Arcturus. These warriors had come to intimidate her people. Now they were learning the price of that arrogance. "Target their command carriers," she ordered her squadron. "Cut off their coordination and they'll fall apart." The fighters dove through the Kryn formation, their drones clearing paths through the defensive screen. Precision strikes hit the carrier vessels that controlled Kryn fleet communications. Without centralized coordination, the Kryn ships began operating independently, each captain making their own tactical decisions. That was exactly what humanity wanted. Individual ships could be isolated and destroyed. A coordinated fleet was dangerous. A collection of lone vessels was just target practice. Lieutenant Colonel Amy Ross coordinated the human fleet's movements from her position aboard the Valiant, her fingers dancing across. He had studied Kryn military doctrine for 8 years, had analyzed hundreds of their historical battles, and knew exactly how they would respond to every tactical situation. The Kryn tried to form a defensive sphere, a classic formation that provided mutual fire support and protected their damaged vessels. Amy had anticipated this 3 moves ago. She directed human ships to positions that created overlapping kill zones, turning the Kryn defensive sphere into a trap. "All ships execute pattern Tiger," she ordered. "Concentrate fire on grid sections 4 through 7. The human fleet opened up with their full arsenals. Railguns hurled solid projectiles at relativistic speeds. Nuclear-pumped lasers carved through hulls designed to withstand energy weapons. Missile salvos overwhelmed point defense systems that had never been designed to handle such volume. The Kryn formation collapsed within 12 minutes. Their commanding officers, trained in thousands of years of military tradition, couldn't adapt to an enemy that ignored every conventional principle. They expected honor in combat, formal challenges and battles fought according to understood rules. Humanity gave them industrial scale, slaughter delivered with scientific precision. High Commander Vortex watched from his flagship as his fleet disintegrated around him. He had brought 200 of the Empire's finest warships, crewed by warriors who had trained their entire lives for combat. They were dying like animals in a slaughter pen, unable to even fight back effectively. He tried to order a retreat, but Danny Foster had anticipated that as well. Human ships had positioned themselves along every escape vector, creating a killing field that covered millions of cubic kilometers. Any Kryn vessel that tried to flee ran straight into prepared firing positions. Vortex's flagship took a railgun hit that penetrated straight through their reactor shielding. The High Commander died instantly when his bridge vaporized, never understanding how completely he had miscalculated. The battle lasted 23 minutes from first shot to final kill. Of the 200 Kryn warships that had crossed into human space, 63 were completely destroyed. 41 more were crippled beyond any hope of repair, drifting hulks that would have to be scuttled. The survivors fled in disorder, their proud formations reduced to panicked ships running for their lives. Human casualties consisted of 2 fighters with minor damage and 1 pilot who broke her arm during an evasive maneuver. No ships were lost. No personnel were killed. Admiral Richard Cole opened a channel to the retreating Kryn forces, his voice carrying across the void to ships filled with shocked and traumatized survivors. "Inform your government," he said. "The exclusion zone around human territory is absolute. Any vessel that enters without authorization will be destroyed. There will be no warnings, no negotiations, and no mercy. Tell your leaders that humanity is done accepting challenges to our sovereignty." He ended the transmission and turned to Amy Ross, who was already compiling the tactical data for transmission to Earth Command. "How long before the next test?" Amy asked quietly. Richard looked at the debris field floating in space, the scattered remains of warriors who had believed their tradition and experience would be enough. "There won't be a next test," he said. "Not for a while. The galaxy needed to see this. They needed to understand that we don't just have better weapons. We have a completely different understanding of what warfare means." Amy nodded slowly, understanding the deeper truth. The galaxy had spent thousands of years developing rules and conventions for warfare, turning combat into something almost ritualized. Humanity had never stopped treating war as existential survival, as something to be won by any means necessary. "The Council will respond," Amy said. "They can't let this stand without some kind of action." Richard smiled coldly, already anticipating the galaxy's next move. They would try to assemble a coalition, would attempt to use overwhelming numbers to force humanity back into submission. It was the logical response from species that still believed conventional military thinking could solve their problem. They were about to learn otherwise. Captain Danny Foster secured his weapons systems and began damage assessment protocols. The Hammer had fired 60% of its ammunition load. He made notes about which systems had performed optimally and which needed adjustment. There would be other battles. The galaxy was learning. But learning took time, and humanity wouldn't give them that luxury. Helen landed her fighter on the Typhoon's deck, her hands finally showing the tremor that adrenaline had suppressed during combat. She had personally accounted for 9 Kryn interceptors destroyed. Her drones had eliminated another 26. The number should have disturbed her, but all she felt was grim satisfaction. These warriors had come to threaten human colonies. They had believed their ancient traditions made them superior. Now they were debris floating in the void, and humanity's message was written in their wreckage. The galaxy could accept the new reality, or it could send more fleets to die. Either way, humanity would never again hide their strength or accept treatment as inferiors. The age of human courtesy was over. The age of human dominance had begun. 6 months after the destruction of the Kryn fleet at the border, the Galactic Council convened to formally acknowledge what everyone already knew. High Arbiter Zeltun stood before the assembly, his crest held in a neutral position that Jake Morrison had learned to interpret as resignation mixed with cautious respect. The Council recognizes humanity as a Tier 1 species, Zeltun announced, his voice lacking the contempt that had colored his words during previous interactions with humans. Furthermore, Earth is granted a permanent seat on the Security Directorate with full veto authority over military actions. Jake Morrison accepted the declaration with a simple nod, understanding that this wasn't the victory it might appear to be. Lisa Hayes stood beside him, her expression carefully neutral as she watched the various species representatives. Some showed relief that the conflict hadn't escalated further. Others radiated barely concealed resentment at being forced to accept humanity as equals. Fear had replaced contempt, but Jake knew that fear was an unstable foundation for lasting peace. Still, it was better than the alternative of continued warfare. Humanity had proven their point with brutal efficiency. Now came the harder task of building something sustainable from the ashes of the old order. Captain Danny Foster walked through the rebuilt streets of New Haven, observing the changes that 6 months had brought. The colony had grown since the crisis, with new settlers arriving every week. People wanted to live on the world that had sparked humanity's transformation, the place where Earth had finally stopped asking permission and started demanding respect. A memorial stood in the central square, a simple stone structure with the names of everyone who had lived through the siege. The inscription read words that captured everything that had changed. Here, humanity stopped being polite. Children played in the streets now without fear, their parents no longer watching the skies with anxiety. The Welsh were gone, their entire military structure shattered and their government collapsed into internal chaos. Other species had learned the lesson that the Welsh had paid for, with their extinction as a galactic power. Commander Helen Grant commanded the Outer Colonies Defense Group from the carrier Typhoon, now permanently stationed in the Arcturus sector. Her job was to ensure that no threat ever came close to human colonies again. She ran constant patrols, conducted training exercises, and maintained readiness levels that would have seemed paranoid before the crisis. But Helen understood something that civilian populations sometimes forgot. The galaxy had accepted humanity's strength out of necessity, not genuine respect. The moment they perceived weakness, some species would test human resolve again. It was the nature of power politics, and humanity couldn't afford to ever appear vulnerable. She stood on the carrier's observation deck, looking out at the stars and thinking about her brother's family living safely on New Haven below. That safety had been purchased with violence and the threat of more violence. It wasn't the future she had hoped for when Earth first reached the stars, but it was the reality they had to work with. Admiral Richard Cole had retired from active service 3 months after the border engagement. His mission accomplished and his conscience weighing heavily on him. He spent his retirement writing tactical manuals and teaching at Earth's military academy, sharing the lessons learned from humanity's brief but brutal introduction to galactic warfare. On his final day of active duty, he had addressed the graduating class of new officers with words that stuck with them throughout their careers. "We showed the galaxy that we can fight," he told them. "We proved that our weapons work and our tactics are superior. But strength without wisdom is just brutality. Your generation will have to show them that we can also build, that we can create something better than what existed before." The young officers had listened carefully, understanding that they were inheriting a galaxy that feared humanity, but hadn't yet learned to trust them. That trust would have to be earned through actions, not just words. Jake Morrison worked tirelessly to reshape the Galactic Council into an institution that actually served its stated purpose. He proposed new oping species and limitations on aggressive expansion by powerful empires. Some species supported these reforms genuinely. Others went along because opposing humanity seemed dangerous. Lisa Hayes managed the delicate diplomatic reality behind Jake's public initiatives. She built careful alliances with species that had also suffered under the old council system. The Nerean Federation had been raided by the Welsh for generations. The Helios Compact had lost colonies to Kryn expansion. The Salian Assembly had been dismissed and ignored despite having advanced technology and culture. These species found common cause with humanity's push for reform. They formed a voting bloc that could actually challenge the traditional powers, creating the first real opposition the Council had seen in millennia. Change came slowly and with constant resistance, but it came. Lieutenant Colonel Amy Ross compiled intelligence reports that painted a complex picture of the galaxy's response to humanity's emergence. Some species were genuinely grateful for the protection that human military power provided. Smaller civilizations that had lived in fear of their larger neighbors suddenly found themselves with an ally, willing to use force on their behalf. Other species resented humanity's rapid rise and plotted ways to counter human advantages. They studied the battles at Arcturus and the border, analyzing human tactics and searching for weaknesses. Amy made sure that Earth's military stayed ahead of these efforts, constantly developing new weapons and strategies to maintain their edge. 1 year after the crisis began, Jake returned to Central Hub Station for a private meeting with Murix of the Orthodyne Collective, the crystalline being pulsed with colors that translated to cautious curiosity, rather than the hostility Jake had become accustomed to. Your species has fundamentally altered the galactic balance, Murix said. Some of us question whether this change serves the greater good. Jake considered his response carefully, knowing that this conversation would shape how the Orthodyne viewed humanity going forward. We didn't want to change anything, he said honestly. We came to the stars hoping to join a community of peaceful cooperation. What we found was a system where might made right, where the strong exploited the weak, and where justice was just empty words and council charters. Murix's light flickered in patterns that suggested he was processing this statement with genuine thought rather than dismissing it. And now you impose your vision through force, the Orthodyne representative observed. How is that different from what came before? Jake met Murix's crystalline gaze directly. Because we remember what it felt like to be powerless, he said. We remember asking for help and being ignored. We remember the fear of watching enemy ships circle our colony while the council debated and did nothing. That memory guides everything we do. He paused, then continued with absolute conviction. We're not claiming to be perfect. We're not saying our way is the only way, but we're offering something the old order never did: protection for species that can't protect themselves. A voice for those who aren't heard. Strength used in service of something beyond just maintaining power. Murix dimmed slightly, his form flickering between colors as he considered Jake's words. And if species resist this new vision? He asked. If they see humanity as new tyrants replacing old ones? Jake's expression hardened just slightly, showing the steel beneath the diplomatic surface. Then they'll have to decide whether their resistance is worth the cost, he said quietly. We don't want to be the galaxy's enforcer. We'd much rather be partners in building something better, but we won't allow the kind of injustice that led to the New Haven crisis. We won't stand by while strong species prey on weak ones. He stood to leave, then turned back to face Murix one last time. Earth's courtesy is gone, Jake said. We won't hide our strength or pretend to be something we're not. But we're offering the galaxy a choice. Work with us to build a more just system, or learn what happens when humanity stops holding back. Murix pulsed thoughtfully, understanding the implicit message. The Arcturus battle and the border engagement had been demonstrations of human capability, but they weren't the full extent of what humanity could do. Earth had revealed enough strength to demand respect, but kept enough hidden to maintain deterrence. Back on Earth, in military facilities hidden throughout the solar system, humanity continued developing weapons and tactics that they hoped would never be needed. Scientists worked on projects that pushed the boundaries of physics. Engineers designed ships that made the current fleet look primitive. Strategists planned for conflicts decades in the future. The galaxy saw humanity as militarily dominant. The truth was more complex. Humanity had shown just enough strength to establish themselves as equals, while maintaining sufficient mystery to keep potential enemies cautious. It was a careful balance between demonstrating capability and maintaining deterrence through uncertainty. On New Haven, Patricia Cole watched her grandchildren play in streets that had once been surrounded by enemy warships. Her husband Richard visited frequently, enjoying retirement but always keeping one eye on the strategic situation. They had lived through the crisis that changed everything, and they understood both the cost and necessity of what humanity had done. The galaxy had forced humanity to reveal their true nature. In doing so, they had unleashed something that couldn't be put back in its box. Humans who had tried to be peaceful partners had become warriors out of necessity. Now they had to figure out how to be both, strong enough to defend themselves and their allies, but wise enough not to become the very thing they had opposed. It was a challenge that would define humanity's place in the galaxy for generations to come. Whether they succeeded or failed would determine not just Earth's future, but the future of every species that depended on the new order humanity was trying to build. Jake Morrison knew this as he walked through the council halls, nodding to representatives who now treated him with respect instead of contempt. The battle for military dominance was over. Humanity had won that decisively. Now came the longer, harder battle, proving that strength could serve justice, that power could be used wisely, and that the species who had hidden their fangs for 15 years could be trusted with the influence they had claimed. The galaxy watched and waited, uncertain whether humanity represented hope for something better or just another cycle of power replacing power. Time would tell which side was right, but either way, Earth's courtesy was gone forever. Humanity would face the future as they truly were. Dangerous, capable, and absolutely unwilling to ever again accept being treated as inferior. The age of human truth had begun, and the galaxy would have to adapt or face the